We Beat the Street, Chapter 14. How do you plead? The judge asked. Guilty, Your Honor. Samson, 12th grade. It was the summer between junior and senior year. School was out, and Samson, glad to be away from homework and teachers and academic responsibilities for a little while, enjoyed kicking it with his friends on the corner. They knew the most dangerous thing to do in Newark was to stand on the corner and mind your own business. Anything could happen. A drive-by shooting, a fight, police harassment. The corner was the welcome center for all of it. Nevertheless, that is where they hung out every day. Samson had been warned many times by his mother to stay off of the corner. There's nothing but trouble out there. Whatever happened to you hanging out with Reggie? You need to get back into Kung Fu. Those boys you hang out with now aren't going anywhere with their life. Remember, you make your bed. You gotta lay in it. Samson knew his mother was right. She had been through so many struggles, and he realized that she wanted a better life for him. She tried to keep him on a straight path, but the streets were getting the best of him. Aimless summer days with nothing to do were the biggest opportunity for him to fall into trouble and become another statistic. George and Ramik had jobs that summer, so the three friends did not spend as much time together during vacation, and Samson fell back into old habits with old friends. He found work at McDonald's, which gave him spending money, but little else. The desire to have more and to have it quickly was overpowering in a neighborhood where drug dealers drove expensive cars and walked around decorated in diamonds and gold as commonly as trees wore leaves of green. Man, I need to make a move, Samson said, flexing his muscles and stretching his neck. He felt like a toy wound up too tightly. Got any ideas? Rob somebody before they rob you, joked a kid named Buddy. Hey, you got a good idea there, man. Why don't we rob some drug dealers? They got plenty of cash, another dude suggested. You crazy, man. They got guns and will shoot you dead before you have a chance to spend a dime of their money, Samson said. No, man, Buddy said. We don't rob the experienced drug dudes. We hit the young ones, the stupid ones, the kids. Yeah, sounds like a plan to me, another boy in their group said. We hit them hard, hit them quick, then get out of there before they know what happened. Samson was doubtful it would work, but it sounded so easy. It wasn't wrong, he figured. They wouldn't be selling the drugs, just taking money away from the kids who did sell the stuff. They would be like the Robin Hoods of their community by taking from those who were poisoning the area. The first couple of times they tried it, everything went smoothly. Samson and his boys dressed all in black and drove to a street corner where they knew drug dealers hung out. One of the boys always pulled out a gun to scare the kids into obedience. Samson didn't like the inclusion of the gun in the process because he felt it increased their chances of things going wrong. The last thing Samson needed was for someone to get shot in all the chaos. Nonetheless, a gun was simply part of the scene, as natural to him and his friends as pulling out a candy bar from a pocket. Samson and his friends would snatch the money from the unsuspecting young dealers and jump back into their car before anyone had a chance to respond. They split the money 4 ways and exulted in the ease and glory of it all. Nobody ever got hurt. The next time they went out, Samson was the driver. Even though somewhere deep down he felt uncomfortable about what they were doing, the excitement of the attack and the exhilaration of the take were too much to resist. They drove around until they spotted a group of teenagers hanging out on a corner. They knew the kids there had to be dealers. Samson, Buddy, and the other 2 boys jumped out of Samson's car, preparing to beat up the kids. Buddy pulled out a gun. Empty your pockets, he demanded harshly. Usually when they did this, the kids they jumped gave Samson and his friends their money and ran away. But this time, just as the kids were fearfully handing over the money, another car, a brown 4-door Chevrolet, unexpectedly pulled up next to them. In that car were 4 older dudes, heavier and tougher looking than the kids they were used to dealing with. They looked at Samson and his friends suspiciously. Samson saw with alarm that the car had a police radio mounted on the floor. Cops, he shouted wildly to his friends, each of whom took off running. Suddenly, the police cars appeared from all directions, sirens blaring, lights flashing. Instead of running, Samson walked slowly, appearing to be unfazed by the commotion, and no one stopped him. He kept walking, hoping and praying that he would get away. Finally, he made it to the corner and began to run. huge, loping strides that took him blocks away from the scene. When he got far enough away, he stopped, caught his breath, and wiped the sweat from his brow. He waited for a half hour or so, then doubled back to the scene to pick up his car. It was gone. There was no trace of the dealers, the police, or the crowds of people who had gathered to watch the excitement. The street corner was deserted. Not sure what to do, Samson hailed a cab and went home. He told no one what had gone down that afternoon, and he slept very little that night, worrying about what would happen when his name was connected to that car. The next morning, he made some calls and found that his car had been towed by the Montclair Police Department. They asked him to come in for questioning. All three of the boys he'd been with the day before had been arrested. Samson finally confided in his older sister, who drove him to the police station. "They'll probably let you go, since you're a juvenile," she said, with a confidence that Samson didn't share. Samson sat in silence, playing the scene over and over again in his mind. He was stuck on the same point. Had they connected him to the robbery? When they arrived at the station, Samson was taken into a small dark room inside the police headquarters. In it were a table and 2 chairs. Samson sat down on one side of the table. A detective sat down on the other and flipped on the tape recorder. Samson trembled inside, but he didn't show it. "People say you were involved in an incident yesterday," the detective began. "What incident was that?" Samson replied, appearing clueless. "Marshall," the officer said, "you might as well come clean. Your boys already told us the whole story." Samson took a deep breath, realizing it had to be true. The detective had called him by his middle name, Marshall. Only his family and friends knew Samson by that name. Samson thought about the code of the streets. What happened to the loyalty, the no-snitch policy? How dare they rat on him? The detective interrupted Samson's thoughts and began to describe the robbery. Samson still considered lying, pretending to know nothing about what had happened, but it was too late for that now. He had been caught and had to tell the truth. For the first time, Samson realized that the streets had no love for him. Samson sighed and said, "Yeah, I was there, but we didn't hurt nobody." "Did you take their money?" It was drug money." "I repeat, did you take the money?" "Yes, sir." "Did one of you have a gun?" "Well, I never touched a gun," Samson declared. "I repeat, did one of you have a gun?" "Yes, sir." Samson slumped in his chair in defeat. He thought, "I knew that gun would get us in trouble." "I'm placing you under arrest. Because a gun was involved in the commission of this crime, you are being charged with armed robbery and will be sent to a juvenile detention center in Newark." "I can't go home?" Samson asked. "My sister said since I was a juvenile, I'd be released." "Your sister was wrong." Samson was taken to a detention center, a nice name for a jail. It had 4 units, based on the type of crime committed. Samson was placed in Unit 1, the section where juveniles arrested for violent crimes were assigned. Even the word crime stuck in his throat. What they had done was just for fun, something to do to take up time during the hot summer. He had never considered it a crime, but the police certainly did. "How did I get myself in a place like this?" he thought miserably. "How could I let down my parents, the rest of my family? What am I going to tell Ramik and George?" He did not know at that time that Ramik had been in a similar situation just a few months before. All he knew was that he had never felt so alone, so out of place, and so angry with himself. He had lots of time to think as he lay awake those hot summer nights, unable to sleep on the hard cot in the skinny, uncomfortable cell. It was tiny, with barely enough space to fit a body in. He had no pillow or blanket, not even a sheet to cover him. The thin mattress had been slept on by many previous bodies and was decorated with saturated urine stains from former residents. The boys he'd been arrested with had also been incarcerated, but for some reason, not at the location where Samson was held. He didn't know where they were, and he didn't care. They had ratted him out and left him to suffer the consequences alone. Samson resolved that if he ever got out, he'd stay away from dudes like that, but he knew it would be difficult. He wondered how George and Ramik were spending their summer. He thought quite a bit about the plans they had made together to try for the program at Seton Hall, years of college or years of jail. There was no comparison. Samson had once asked George, who always seemed focused on the goal of making it to college, how he did it. "Well, I just believe it can happen," George had said. "But how?" Samson had insisted. It just seems easier to give up. No one from our neighborhood ever makes it out. You're either gunned down or arrested, or you get some crazy disease. Everybody fails, he had declared. But I don't plan to fail, George had replied with a grin. Samson let the subject drop. Here in this hot jail cell, failure walked with him every day. It was difficult to see a bright outcome. His parents visited him regularly and hired a lawyer. Samson felt bad that he had to face his parents in that kind of a setting where they could visit him only for limited periods of time. It hurt him that he had caused them so much pain. What has the lawyer told you lately? Samson asked his mother during one visit. Well, they're talking about trying you as an adult, his mother said with fear in her voice. That means a possible sentence of 3 to 10 years in an adult prison. 3 to 10 years? Are they crazy? Samson replied. Samson was terrified at the thought of being locked up for so long. Just the few weeks he had spent in the detention center were more time than he ever wanted to do. Each day took an eternity to pass by. The routines were strict, the food was awful, and the other residents seemed to function as one mindless organism. Samson did his best to keep himself apart from their indifference. In the television room, he watched the same shows over and over again while listening to the activities outside his window. Sometimes he sat at the window, trying to connect to a face to the voices outside. A metal fence prevented him from seeing anyone on the ground level. The lawyer worked furiously to get the charges lessened. Just before Samson was scheduled to go to court, the lawyer told him that he had worked out a possible deal. If you plead guilty as a juvenile, you'll get a 2-year suspended sentence and 2 years of probation. What does that mean? Samson asked, unsure of the details of the legal system. Will I have a record? Not if we are able to get this plea agreement. I don't want to say I did something that I didn't do. I admit I did some stuff I shouldn't have, but for real, I never touched that gun, Samson insisted. The lawyer replied, if you stay out of trouble, and I mean squeaky clean, you hear me? Then you won't have to serve any time in jail. And since you are still a juvenile, the crime won't appear on your permanent record. Samson breathed deeply with relief. Since this plea agreement had been pulled together at the very last minute, there had been no time to inform Samson's parents. They knew nothing about it. Samson stood before the judge. His mother sat not far from him, behind the wooden partition. How do you plead? The judge asked. Guilty, Your Honor, Samson said. His heart thudded, and his mouth felt like it was full of cotton. Then it is the judgment of this court to sentence you to 2 years suspended sentence and 2 years probation, dependent upon. He was interrupted just then by a scream from the room. Samson's mother, who thought the judge was sentencing her son to 2 years in jail, cried out, Your Honor, take me instead. He's just a boy. He didn't know what he was doing. Oh, Lord, take me instead. At that moment, Samson had never loved his mother more, and he realized for the first time how deeply she loved him. He felt ashamed and promised himself to turn his life around. Eventually, everything was explained to her. The judge admonished Samson about staying out of trouble for his mother's sake, if for no other reason. After having spent 4 weeks in jail, Samson was released. He swore to himself once more, never again. Never. A few weeks later, Samson stood by the basketball hoops of Dayton Street School. Buddy, one of the other guys who'd been involved in the robbery, bounced the basketball. He was out on bail, awaiting his trial. Sup, man? Chillin', Samson replied. You get off? Buddy asked. Suspended sentence. You lucky. Helps that you're not 18 yet, Buddy replied. He was older, had 2 prior offenses, and was going to do time in jail. They shot a few hoops. So what you gonna do now? Buddy asked. I'm thinking about going to college, Samson said with pride. Me and my partners from high school made a pact, and I've been talking about it. Buddy and a couple of other guys who were shooting hoops with them stopped the game and broke down laughing. They laughed so hard they had to catch their breath. Man, that ain't never gonna happen, Buddy said. Nobody from around here goes to college. Do you know who you are and where you're from? Samson said firmly, Well, I'll be the first. In that moment, he realized he had to look beyond them, beyond their ridicule, and find a way to make it past the impossibilities. He left them laughing. That was the last time Samson hung out with his boys. Eventually, all of the boys who had been involved with Samson in the robbery received jail time. Samson had been spared for some reason he did not yet understand, but he was ready to find out. A conversation with Dr. Samson Davis. Never again. There are turning points in everyone's life. My experience as a juvenile in the detention center helped me realize that I was traveling down a road of destruction. That summer helped me turn my life around and aim for something positive. I realized the company you keep plays tremendously in the outcome of your life. My street friends had given up and had no direction. I knew if I continued to hang out with them, I would fall victim to the same aimlessness. Going to college was not a common goal for kids in my neighborhood. I felt I had no choice, however. College represented hope. Staying on the streets most likely meant more jail time or drug addiction or death. So I stepped out on faith and headed for a brighter future. Often, I felt survivor's guilt since I felt my family and neighborhood friends behind. Since I left my family and neighborhood friends behind. But I realized before I can help anyone else, I must take care of myself first. Then I could reach out and give back. I feel strongly that giving back is a responsibility for all to embrace. Let me tell you about the boys I used to hang out with. 2 of them were murdered. 2 of them are strung out on drugs. 1 of them is in jail. I've lost contact with the others. And yes, I held true to my promise. Never again did I get involved with criminal activities. Never again did I get mixed up with the police. Never again did I travel on that road to destruction.